Coming back to the time before the wedding, I made sure to take my coworkers to visit the new house. When we stumbled upon my fiancée and her first love in a state of undress on the new bed, my heart sank. To calm the rumors, my well-born fiancée married her first love. The original house, the wedding, everything switched grooms. Her first love flaunted. Your status, your life, all of it, all mine now. Jack, you lost to me twice. What a pity. So he had come back to life too. But so what? Now I just wanted to be myself. On that day, I stood blankly at the entrance of the factory, watching the workers rush out after work, the streets crowded and noisy. I pinched myself. The pain confirmed it was all real. My middle school mate and best friend, Eric, approached me. Jack, let's go. The cafeteria must be packed by now. I suddenly grabbed him. Eric? Did Susan and I get the marriage certificate? The young Eric looked puzzled. Aren't you supposed to go to the registry tomorrow? I even swapped shifts with you. Turns out fate had sent me back to the day before getting the certificate with Susan, September 20th. How could I forget this day? I quickly told Eric, wait, my uncle from the countryside sent some dried goods. I want to give them to you. Only Eric, who knows me best, would be outraged on my behalf. Your uncle was never kind to you back then, out there. Now he's sucking up just because you're getting married. A bold voice called from behind. Jack, we're all in the same department. Is it fair to play favorites? We turned to see Jason and a few coworkers. Eric wanted to stand up for me, but I held him back. Let's all go together. In the past, Jason was my fierce competitor in business. We were always at odds, and he was especially sarcastic now. I heard your new place is all set with the priciest brands. Lucky us to catch a glimpse. Thanks to you, Jack. I thought you'll definitely be amazed. At 12:15 p.m., lunchtime, we arrived. I could already hear the noises inside as I prepared to open the door, hands trembling. Eric heard it too, looking shocked. Jason, tall and thinking there might be a thief in there, stepped up on the windowsill to peek inside. He turned red, shouting, shameless. Chairs clattering inside. I flung the door open. Susan quickly pulled clothes over herself, hair messy, eyes avoiding mine. Calvin's shirt buttons were gone, struggling to button up, while his pale skin revealed clear marks. The room small, there was nowhere to hide. Definitely a scene to remember. Though I braced myself mentally, I stood against the door, speechless. Susan rushed towards me. Jack, it's not what you think, while Calvin shrieked. Eric grabbed a hot kettle, opened it, and splashed water towards Susan and Calvin. Shameless bastards. The room filled with shouts and screams, while others ran off. Furious, Jason shouted, call the cops. Jack's place got burglars. A pair of them. As word spread, the supervisor and deputy factory director rushed over, catching the scene. Eric wanted the police to arrest them. Aren't they thieves? Stealing affairs, isn't that stealing too? The deputy scolded. Mind your own business. Unexpectedly, Jason pointed at Susan. Director, you can't let this pass just because Susan was transferred from Y City. This is Jack's place, the certificate's tomorrow. Everyone stared at pale-faced me and a silent Susan. Susan glared at me, angry, fists clenched. I shook my head, words stuck in my throat. No certificate, no wedding, and I'm done with this house. Turning, I walked away. Susan rushed to stop me, whispering apologetically yet firmly, Jack, don't be petty. Marriage doesn't matter. But you must help clean this up, or Calvin's life will be ruined. I widened my eyes. She didn't even bother with a fake apology, only caring about how her first love would live. But didn't I bring people here to cause a scene? Taking a deep breath, I feigned ignorance and hurt. You want me to cover it up? Did you screw up? And now he's blackmailing you, asking for your sacrifice? As if I'd be the coward like last time, helping her bury this. Let's see. Between herself and her first love, who would Susan choose? Susan stared in disbelief. Everyone exchanged glances. The deputy hinted at Susan. Susan, think it through. If there's more to it, the factory can help lighten the load. Calvin, wrapped in a sheet, pleaded, Susan, save me. With a hateful glare at me, Susan hesitated, words squeezing out from gritted teeth. I was drunk. Don't know how he got in bed. Believe it or not. Everyone was stunned, including Calvin. Upright Jason erupted, "Director, use some sense, all right? Susan grows legs that don't run." Calvin couldn't shout. Calvin's lips were swollen. Susan, eyes full of care for Calvin, yet needing to clear herself, reluctantly turned away. She grabbed my hand, convincing, "Jack, believe me, I was drunk, didn't know a thing." But her eyes, full of poisonous hatred, were all too clear to me. I covered my eyes, exploding, "Susan, have some decency. No one's blind, and no one's a fool. No matter how much he pressures you, if it's not your choice, could he even get into the new room, sleep in the new bed?" Susan glanced up in fear, meeting the disdainful looks of everyone present. "That's right. I'm tearing apart Calvin, and I'm going to tear myself apart too. In my last life, I helped her cover it up. But after the wedding, she blamed all her mistakes on me. If it wasn't silent treatment, she'd mock me in public. If she wasn't staying out all night, she'd leave clues at home linking her to Calvin. In this life, I won't put up with it. Jack, you? Don't lie to me again." Eric grabbed a broom and aimed it at Susan. "Let go of Jack." Jason surprisingly shielded me and pulled me back. Susan, hooking up with another man before the wedding, and in the fiancé's new room. The deputy manager had to step in cautiously, telling security to take Susan and Calvin away. In front of everyone, Calvin clung to Susan like a moth to a flame. "Susan, weren't you against this marriage from the start? Your father wanted to marry you off to Jack to repay a debt to an old friend, right? Why become a tool to mend your parents' past? We love each other, so why let people call us cheaters? I'm not mad you want to protect yourself, but I can't stand seeing you get fooled by Jack. He married you with an agenda. If he cared about you, why bring this crowd to corner us?" Everyone exchanged glances, their expressions mixed. Susan hugged Calvin but suddenly glared at me with newfound anger. I was so dizzy with anger that I even stumbled over my words. "Aren't you ashamed to do this in front of everyone?" The deputy manager quietly cursed a few times and sincerely advised, "Susan, everyone here's watching. This is too scandalous." Susan's furious face mixed with bravery and understanding. Looking at me, she declared, "No need to leave, deputy manager." "What do you mean?" Whether to rebel against her family's orders or for her dignity, Susan's heart leaned entirely towards Calvin. I said, "Calvin doesn't need to leave. The wedding continues. I'm marrying Calvin." Nearly everyone was momentarily shocked at the announcement. I frowned hard, watching Calvin sneak a fleeting confident and mocking smile at me. In my past life, Calvin's eyes were a mix of complex emotions and jealousy I couldn't comprehend. Eric took me home to calm down. "Jack, how could they turn the tables on you like that?" The thrill of being reborn, achieving a break with Susan, and witnessing that ugly affair left my mind in chaos. I could barely recall the distant past. In my last life, I was an orphan raised by my aunt and uncle after my parents died. They spent all my dad's compensation money, abusing me and treating me like a freeloading worker. It was Mike who returned home successful and remembered the life-saving favor my dad once did. He found me, his old comrade's orphan. He got me into school and gave me a job after graduation. Suddenly, my residency was sorted out. Everything I received was thanks to Mike. So when Mike wanted me to marry Susan, I didn't refuse. Partly out of gratitude, partly because Susan's looks and intelligence filled me with admiration. Once our relationship was set, I worked hard to share common interests and topics with her. But she'd often interrupt indifferently or brush me off with a smile. Until the day before getting our marriage license, I went to the new house and overheard Susan and Calvin laughing and being intimate inside. My mind went blank. Susan wronged me. I should have spoken up and let her face public outrage. But what about Mike? What about the Greens' reputation? Even if I didn't care about Mike, what if Susan's affair got exposed? She would face disgrace and arrest. That meant offending the Greens, losing their protection. Would I return to the countryside to be mistreated by my aunt and uncle as an orphan? I told myself, just endure, it will pass. After the wedding, she urged me to quit my job and move to Y City, letting Calvin take my place. When I was hospitalized, she brought Calvin to live in our Y City house. Even long distance, Susan visited from Y City to a city for him yearly. In the end, I was sent to a nursing home, ignored, only to see on a phone that my children were arranging a belated wedding for Susan and Calvin. In the video, the elderly couple kissed publicly to applause. After Mike's death, she could have divorced me and married Calvin. But why take our kids to him, calling an outsider dad? I endured my life, and this was the end. In the nursing home, I lost the will to live. One night, I just stopped breathing. Your nails are bleeding. Eric took my hand. I glanced up at him. The wedding goes on, but with a new bride. How will Mike see me now? Eric couldn't answer. He knew my relationship with the Greens, but Mike's reactions were either siding with Susan or opposing the wedding, taking Susan back to Y City. Either way, Mike had no reason to keep helping me. I understood. I chose a riskier, harder path than my past life. But I've used all my past life to repay Mike's kindness. This life, I must be Jack again. Eric's mom knocked outside. What's going on? Are you home? I hear Susan's in trouble for messing around with a temp in the bridal room, and you went in splashing water. Eric's mom opened the door, seeing me on the bed, awkwardly paused. Is Jack here too? Susan and Calvin's incident swept through the factory, like a storm. In the conservative 1980s, this was shocking. Caught red-handed and ending like that, who wouldn't talk about it? Eric's mom brought up something unexpected. Jack, your aunt and uncle, they're on the way to the wedding. What now? Before reincarnation, I was so old, I'd forgotten about my long-past aunt and uncle. Eric got nervous. What if your uncle and aunt see you're abandoned by the Greens and want to take you back to the countryside? Scars on my arm reminded me of past beatings. Enduring brought only worsening abuse. I gritted my teeth and said with determination, "It's not my fault. The factory has no reason to fire me. Even if they don't want me, I'll find work elsewhere. I'll never go back with them." Day 2 on the job. Haven't touched a machine in decades, but the moment I did, I was excited and nervous at the same time. My skills and the process were rusty. I was like a newbie, clumsily watching Eric work. Eric moved swiftly, got things done in no time. Jason was standing behind us, hands in his pockets with his work hat on. "Jack, what's up today? Working so slow?" Jason asked. I didn't respond. Eric glared at him. "Some people would do anything to be number one." "What nonsense are you talking about?" retorted Jason. "Who's the one talking nonsense here? What happened just yesterday noon, and by the evening the whole factory knew. Today maybe the entire city does," Eric shot back. Jason defended, "How could I possibly be involved in that?" Eric seemed to have more to say, but I shook my head slightly, spoke politely. "You've seen my state. I might slow us down for a while, but it won't be long. Please bear with me." Jason seemed puzzled. "Jack? Who do you think I'm scheming against? Am I the kind of person who causes trouble to be number one?" I looked at Jason, my rival from past lives, calmly. "I'm just here to see how you're doing. No one deserves such humiliation." He suddenly handed me a bunch of candy. "Take it. I want to compete with you fairly, not using connections, cheating, or anything shady." With that, he turned and walked away. Eric looked at me, speechless. I suddenly understood why those working days are so memorable. It's not just that I was young then, but it was a time when my value was still recognized, and the respect and trust one earned came thanks to my own hands. After work, I was still replaying the day's details in my mind. Suddenly, my uncle and aunt appeared in front of me. From the moment we met, my uncle gripped my wrist tightly. "Jack, come with us now and beg Susan not to cancel the wedding." My aunt dug her nails into the back of my hand with all her might. I felt a gust of wind in my ear as her slap landed on my cheek. She kept cursing, even insulting my parents. Fury erupted within me. "Shut up. You have no right to mention my parents. If even one of them were alive, would you treat me like this?" My aunt hit and scolded me while my uncle remained silent until now. as if he suddenly realized what was happening. "Jack, you shouldn't be ungrateful. We raised you, and why shouldn't we decide for you?" murmured Uncle. People around thought it was just parents disciplining a child until they realized it was relatives. Parents wouldn't beat their child in public. Who are you people really? Auntie, seeing the situation turn, immediately sat on the ground crying loudly. "Woe is me, the nephew I raised doesn't listen to me." I coldly glanced at Aunt throwing a fit, then looked right at Uncle, who's slightly more respectable. "Uncle, do you really want me to sever all ties with you today?" Uncle's eyes darted, his hands gesturing wildly. "What are you saying? We're doing this for your own good. How is this forcing you?" I rolled up my sleeves and pants, showing the scars from past beatings. "Is this your proof of looking out for me?" Uncle quickly stopped my actions. "Don't show that. Jack, even if you're upset, shouldn't display it to people." I retorted, "A minute ago in front of everyone you felt free to hit me. When my parents passed, I was so small, living in the village. How did you look out for me? I know you don't fear ghosts or gods, but really, do you believe you'll never age or die? Even if you fear nothing, what about your kids? Could they still come to the city if I lose my job?" Uncle looked at me, horrified. Aunt, sitting on the ground, forgot her act too. Even the most ignorant scoundrels don't fear spirits but do worry about their kids' futures. They always thought as long as the Greens spoke, my cousins, and I who have a diploma, would automatically get jobs. They wanted to bleed me dry but acted high and mighty as if they owned slaves. Why? Security soon arrived. "Who are you to hit someone?" they asked. Uncle showed an unprecedented humility towards me. "Jack, marrying into the Greens from Y City would be a blessing for our whole family." He then surprisingly slapped himself a few times. "You can't ruin your siblings' future. Lucky are the kids with parents to shield them. Unfortunately, I didn't have that, and I wouldn't let these hypocritical and harsh people morally blackmail me anymore. Who I marry or not is not for them to decide. They can moan about me harming them, but if push comes to shove and it goes to the police, I could press charges for assault. If they get a record, my cousins won't be able to get into any respectable place. Uncle, do you want us all to have no way out?" Uncle and Aunt were reluctantly escorted out by security, and the crowd dispersed gradually. I rubbed my swollen cheek, finally letting out a sigh of relief. There stood Susan with a mocking and sneering face. "Nice show. I thought they'd drag you to beg me not to leave you." I tightened my lips. "What are you doing here?" Susan finished filling in her version of the storyline, smirking. "Your aunt and uncle made such a ruckus. How could anyone not notify me to come save you? Wasn't this, just like yesterday, part of your grand scheme? You've gone so far as to pretend those injuries hoping I'd take pity and marry you?" Bending down, I picked up a stone, hurling it at her. "Yes, everything is a performance. Being an orphan, their abuse, and even finding you and Calvin in our new place. All an act." Susan dodged the stone, livid. This was the first I countered her with such force. "It's good you admitted." She continued, "My parents will only attend my wedding to Calvin, Jack. Stop dreaming." A hint of sarcasm slipped through. "Other than being Mike's daughter, what makes you think anyone values you?" Susan, with her entitled air, grinned a nervous laugh. "I'm born into a prestigious family. I have their support, fair and square. But Jack, what about you? You're just an orphan who got to study and work because of my dad's kindness. Everything you eat, wear, everything, isn't it all 'cause my dad was generous? And marrying me? You'd be hitting the jackpot, becoming someone important. Can you really walk away from me? Jack, you've taken so much from us. Stop acting like the victim, won't ya? I just got a slap from my aunt." And now Susan's words feel like I'm being slapped over and over again. The people around finally dispersed, but they're gathering back, attracted by the commotion. Some familiar faces are pulling at Susan, urging her to leave, not to confront me. Susan won't have it, arrogantly suggesting, "Jack, if you really want to make it up to me, why not kneel and beg right here?" A familiar voice chimed in, "Susan, that's too much." Susan shrugged, saying, "Jack owes my family so much he can never repay it all. What's wrong with asking for one kneel?" I looked at Susan standing there all proud. She just wants to regain her lost pride in one go. Just how delusional was I to think she was someone to rely on? The crowd was getting larger, penned in all around us. Under Susan's taunts, every eye was on me, eager to see me crumble and beg. I felt like I was walking through a storm, remembering all the pains of my past life. Right to the moment I died old and broken on a hospital bed. My phone played back the wedding march, while Susan and Calvin shamelessly made out. My heart monitor's cold beeps replayed in my mind. I've already repaid the Green's kindness and Susan's betrayal with my life. Susan was talking casually, waiting for me to lose my nerve and kneel. Instead, I slapped her across the face. The crowd stepped back, gasping. Susan quickly tried to retaliate, only to have Eric swat her head with a broom, while Jason kicked her from behind, sending her stumbling. "Susan, you scum. Asking who to kneel?" Susan, stunned, faltered Jack. All my past grievances poured out. "Susan, I don't deny Mike's kindness. He's been more than good to me next to my own parents. As a person, I'll never forget his kindness. But I also won't forget the slander and denigration you shoveled on me today. Not marrying you is the best decision I've made. Not making a fuss over your broken engagement is my utmost respect for the Greens. Don't think marrying Calvin fixes everything. Such things require proper reports. Taking action could drag you both into serious trouble." Susan looked shocked by my words. "Jack, are you after revenge? Have you forgotten my father? How dare you?" Breathless, I replied, "You broke the engagement, got with someone else, and yet you keep slandering me. You figured I'm just an orphan who'll silently endure for appearances and gratitude? Sure, many want a leg up on life, but there are more who want to live with dignity. Haven't I faced enough criticism because of you? Must I thank you with endless groveling?" Here and there, people began speaking up for me. "How's Jack playing the victim? It's obvious who's really suffering. Just because he has no parents doesn't mean he should be at your mercy." "Susan." I glanced around at familiar and unfamiliar faces. Eric hugged me hard. Jason couldn't hold back and cursed. "Susan, who's your dad anyway? Who's raising such a rotten daughter?" Seeing the crowd's rising dissatisfaction, Susan tried to throw one last jab. "Jack, you're so cunning. Didn't notice this side of you before. Stirring up a crowd like this?" The crowd closed in around her. "What's stirring? We heard enough of your nonsense. How can we approve of your actions?" Just then the deputy director appeared and yelled, "Susan, get over here." Seeing it's her save, the crowd parted. The deputy spoke low to Susan. "Stop causing trouble. And don't let that guy come find me again." Susan's clothes got crumpled. Her shoes were stepped on, and her body ached in several spots. Seeing the light on in the new house brought her a sense of warmth and longing. Thank goodness Calvin was smart enough to call the deputy director to help out today. But entering quietly, Susan found Calvin facing away from her, humming happily, admiring the men's attire covering the bed. All four corners of the room, once decorated under red covers, were opened, and paper boxes littered the floor. Calvin's face spoke volumes of satisfaction and superficiality. "Jack, I've got all your stuff now." Susan's entrance startled Calvin so much he ducked instinctively. "Don't hit me." "It's me," Susan sighed. Calvin's worry turned to joy, his eyes lighting up. "Susan, you're back. I thought you were Jack or my stepfather." Susan knew about Calvin's troubled past. His birth mother had passed, and his mother then remarried a factory worker. After his mother died, his stepfather wanted to remarry, but once potential brides heard about Calvin, it was always a no. His stepfather tried to drive him out many times, saved only by relatives who got him a temporary job. Sure, Calvin had it rough, but he was also handsome, the kind to draw envy, and was gentle with Susan, unlike stiff and oblivious Jack, obsessed with work and study. Right, why even bring Jack up? Susan resented thinking about Jack making her lose face today, pointing at those clothes on the bed. They were tailored for Jack by my mom and my sisters. "Why'd you mess with them? Can you even wear that?" Methodically, Calvin shrugged off his jacket, revealing a tight shirt underneath. Sidling up to Susan, all pitiful and innocent. I know today was tough. Was Jack really acting all pitiful again? Recalling Jack's words, Susan got inexplicably irritated. Yeah, he actually scolded me. He even threatened to report my behavior. Just because he's hung up on me, planning revenge. Men just deny what they want. She mused, he's a lone guy, how's he supposed to survive without me? I'll show him what's what. From Susan's words, Calvin sensed a grave threat looming. Jack, who's usually quiet, is suddenly so bold, cussing people out and filing complaints? Was it really just a coincidence that time at the new house? Or did he get a second chance at life too? No way, I need to keep Susan from overthinking. Susan, what if your parents don't like me? Susan chuckled. Come on, it's not like we can undo things now. Jack, even if you did get a do-over, I'll still take everything from you. Dinner was at Eric's place and Jason tagged along. My hands shook as I held the chopsticks. Eric tried to comfort me. Jack, you did great today. You even put your uncle, aunt, and Susan in their place. Turns out, flipping tables isn't as hard as people say. The two big mountains that used to weigh me down, they weren't as tough as I thought. Jason suddenly said, the quarterly review's coming up. You'll be first again and I'll be second. Guess I should be happy. Eric rolled his eyes. I thought you were supporting Jack today, but you're still messing with him? Setting his chopsticks down, Jason looked at me seriously. The factory has a spot every 3 years to go study in Y City. Top picks go to the ones with the best evaluations. I've been number 1 for 3 years, but somehow, it's your turn now? I asked, you think because I'm marrying Susan, the factory rigged it for me? Jason sighed, a lot of people think that. Even with Susan's ugly breakup, you still got first place. Shows you've got skills. I replied, Jason, we've been working together for 3 years. Don't you know my skills by now? Jason shrugged, but then apologized. Sorry, I shouldn't assume the worst. I just hate losing. You haven't lost anything, I assured him. Even if we're rivals, you helped get rid of Susan without holding a grudge. That speaks volumes about your character. You've been one of the few people who's really helped me. Jason, for that alone, I'd give you all the awards. Jason teared up. Who wants your charity? Let's compete fair and square. Deal? Maybe it's time for me to live differently in this life. I'll rely on my own talents to get promoted to Y City. Jason's such a good friend. During the last quarter's awards in our department, people lightly clapped when I got first place again, looking puzzled. It was Jason leading the applause that made everyone join in. But back at my desk, everyone was shocked. My desk was trashed, tools wrecked. Didn't need to sign it. There are no cameras these days and no one was around. The only one I've clashed with recently could only be one person. Calvin's backfired antics only helped my complaint gain traction. Not only did I report him, but so did others from my department and other workers. Susan's unit wasn't part of the factory, but she got demoted too. Calvin didn't care. He moved right into the new house the next day, openly living there. They said the marriage paperwork is processing. Since he's not an employee anymore, he's not the factory's problem. I'll be going to Y City soon. I don't need temporary factory workers. It infuriated many. Even Calvin's relative, who got him into the factory, was beyond embarrassed. They blamed him for being a disaster, bringing shame on the family. Then I got called into the factory office. I thought they were going to confront me about the reports. Instead, they handed me a transfer to Y City. In the past, I got this chance only because I married Susan. Now, I don't even want Susan. Why am I getting this transfer? Asked the factory boss if there was a mistake. He smiled, no mistake, this is Mike's idea. Whether Mike's trying to make amends or keep peace, it's about protecting Susan. Factory boss, I can't accept something I didn't earn. Jack, think it over. Don't rush away. Walking out the office, I was frustrated. Calvin jumped out of nowhere, giving me a hard shove. I didn't fall, just stumbled a bit. Bastard, did you get a redo too? He crossed his arms, glaring like he wanted to skin me alive. So different from his past life, fake niceness. I don't know what you're talking about. Whether he's reliving or not, I ditched Susan already, no more pointless talk. Calvin scoffed. Jack, you're quite the actor. Last time, pretending to be unlucky. Got Susan to remember you fondly after you died. And you're still acting. If you hadn't gotten a redo, you wouldn't have barged into the new house and confronted Susan so confidently. I glanced at some windows in a nearby building. Just because you guys are shameless doesn't mean I couldn't catch you. Calvin was fuming mad. Keep acting. This life you won't play any tricks and steal Susan back. I came back months ago. Susan's mine through and through. Jack, both lives, you're a loser, so pathetic. No wonder he stayed calm at the new house. A few words and Susan flipped sides. If I'm destined to lose, at least I can send a gift. He pulled out a thin blade, slashing it across his hand, then charged at me like a maniac. I quickly backed away, running into a passerby around the corner. Calvin threw the blade, bloody, crying for help. Help! Jack attacked me. Just then, Susan ran over from a distance. Calvin, what happened? Susan, you must protect me. Jack tried to cut my face with a blade. Susan gave me an angry look. Did you do this? I raised an eyebrow. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't sneak around. Do you two even have a face worth slashing? Susan gave me a long look and then said, Calvin, is this a misunderstanding? Jack wouldn't do such a thing. Calvin looked shocked. I added, by the way, it was me who wrote that complaint about both of you. Susan laughed. So you're done acting nice and going for revenge? Calvin's face grew more sour. Susan's always been a hot-tempered, spoiled brat, thinking she's above everyone. It's no shock her mood swings around. In the past, Susan cheated with Calvin. Like many couples, they had their share of arguments and disagreements. Every time Susan got angry with Calvin, she'd turn around and be all nice to me. But he thought the daily grind was too boring, so he would always run back to make up with Calvin. Once they mended fences, Susan wouldn't come home for a while and would sweet-talk Calvin again. This cycle repeated over the years. Being indecisive was just who he was. Now I just watched Susan trying to act like a phony do-gooder with a mix of helplessness and disgust. It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is, I don't want Susan anymore. Calvin, no matter how much you do, it's pointless. I looked at Susan again. Keep an eye on him. Your wedding is just around the corner. How do you think Mike would be happy seeing you both untrustworthy of each other? Susan paused and immediately shot back. Jack, do you really care about me? Or are you just pretending to care using the name of your father? Gross. Calvin immediately acted all hurt. Susan tried to comfort him. It's just a scratch. Stop being a drama queen. Jason, who had been in the background, couldn't help but laugh. Who attacks with a blade? Wouldn't a knife be easier to use? Which victim gets cut and then keeps chasing the attacker? This play is so old school, and you think you're so great? Calvin was furious. It's all Jack's fault. You must have helped him set me up. Hearing that, Jason perked up. Everyone knows Jack and I are competitors. When it comes to the department evaluation, it's either him first or me first. Fierce competition, you know? That's us. Jack's a pushover. If I were him, you and that piece of trash would have gotten beaten up right then and there by me. Susan got mad. Watch your mouth. Jason replied sarcastically. Just 'cause I'm cursing him doesn't mean I can't curse you, too. Trash. That watch on Calvin's wrist. It was a gift from our department to Jack for his engagement. How dare he flaunt it around? Wasn't it you who egged him on? Do you think your reputation isn't loud enough? From now on, every time we see you, we'll spit on you. Complete rubbish ruining our plant's reputation. Jason was getting so into it, he felt like going over and kicking them. Previously silent young man grabbed Jason. Susan tugged Calvin away, feeling the watch on her wrist. She couldn't help but glance at me. Don't stop me. I'll spit on them to death. Susan hurriedly pulled Calvin away. Well said. Jason held his head high and only then noticed that a row of lush trees hid a large crowd. The windows on the 5th floor of the building were open, packed with onlookers from the plant. Even the plant manager stood by the window looking grim. Jason, count me in. From now on, when I see them, I'll spit on them too. The young man holding Jason was her brother, Alex. He teased lightly. Got you all riled up, now everyone knows you're a spitter. Jason felt socially mortified in an instant. That night, the deputy plant manager and security took people to their new place. Calvin kept up his act. Our wedding is just days away. Do we really need to quibble over this? And I also want to report that Jack hurt me with a blade. Why are you laughing? The deputy plant manager didn't want to waste words on him and signaled security to act. Calvin leaned against the doorframe defiantly. Susan came back looking distraught. Calvin saw her, instantly acting tough. Susan, this is your house. How can they stop us from living here? The deputy plant manager gave Calvin a sharp look, and Calvin fell silent. Susan, the plant has its own rules. Back then, because you were marrying Jack, you were considered a special talent along with Jack as an outstanding staff member, so this place was specially approved for you. Now the groom has changed, and you're getting transferred at the end of the year. This house is set for something else. Susan just came out of the plant manager's office, so she knew why the arrangements were made. Yet Calvin couldn't accept it. You're unreasonable. Susan is a special talent. She's not moving until the end of the year. How can you not let her stay? The deputy plant manager ignored Calvin and only said to Susan, Susan, a bed in the dorm has already been prepared for you. Calvin clung to Susan's arm. Say something. Susan coldly shrugged off Calvin's hold. I agree with the arrangement. I'll pack and move today. It's just that the house has many things I can't move all at once. The deputy plant manager was quite accommodating. Don't worry. We'll add a sturdier lock and reinforce the windows to ensure not even a fly can get in. Calvin was so angry he stomped his feet. What about me? No job and no shelter, do what you have to do. You can't stay here. After the deputy plant manager left, Susan began packing. Susan, why aren't you standing up for me? Calvin asked angrily. Why did you go after Jack? Calvin was speechless. I didn't. It was him. Are you seriously going to keep acting? Calvin bit his lip tightly, tears of regret falling. Susan sighed. I know I didn't help you get your place straight earlier, causing you a lot of grievances. But we're almost married, you've moved into the new place, you're wearing Jack's clothes, his watch, what else are you dissatisfied with? Calvin sobbed. It's Jack who tricked me. Susan smiled wryly. If you hadn't gone after him, could he have set you up? Jack is stiff and boring, but does he really have the guts to harm others? Even his nemesis, Jason, is speaking for him. Is it just because Jack's that nice? Haven't you noticed our reputation's been ruined? Calvin was seething with hatred. With a moment of hesitation, Susan had already packed her bags. Calvin clung to Susan. Susan, if you leave, what about me? Why is the plant taking the new house back? Susan couldn't hold back any longer. Stop it. Taking back the house, that decision was my mother's. That night, with nowhere to go, Calvin had no choice but to return to his stepdad's house, thick-skinned as ever. He bribed his youngest sister to sneak him in during the night. His stepdad thought it was a burglar and was scared to death by Calvin. They yelled and screamed, waking up everyone in the dorm building. Calvin, hands on hips, shouted, You think I like this pigsty? When I marry Susan, I'll be living large in Y City, and you all will have to suck up to me. The next day at work, everyone gathered around, chit-chatting. They all wondered what the Greens' parents would think of Calvin as a son-in-law. Nobody quite understood how Calvin could be so brazen. In reality, the philosophy between Calvin and Susan was summed up in 2 words: sneak and snatch. For Calvin, Susan was just like a wife is not as good as a mistress, and a mistress is not as good as a stolen one. For Susan, Calvin was something she couldn't get, a prized possession to be stolen from another man's grasp. In a previous life, it was the Greens' well-off family and the stable support I offered Susan that provided them with the means for their affair games. The fresh excitement is what keeps them going, enjoying themselves. Once they finally get married, they equate it with a dull routine life. Will they really still live happily ever after? I was lost in thought when my boss suddenly called me to the office and handed me an envelope. Inside was a business card for a hotel set up in City A. It said room 1001. Susan's dad asked me to give it to you. They hope you'll pay them a visit tomorrow. Today, in a past life, was my and Susan's wedding day. I was wearing a red shirt and black pants. My hair was thick and black, shoulder length, looking lively. But when Susan saw my outfit, she just clicked her tongue coolly. Well, it's barely okay. I swallowed my sadness and disappointment but still stood behind Susan. I, who had never seen happiness, thought starting a family would guarantee a happy life. But what happened? I wasn't happy. I devoted my life to ensuring the Greens' happiness. I went to Mike's hotel room. Mike and Maria were there with that strong, authoritative presence I remembered. Their being here meant they truly had no plans to attend Susan's wedding. Mike sighed deeply. I know everything about you too. Jack, you've done nothing wrong. I know you're someone who repays kindness. The things prepared for your wedding, you left them. You even returned the transfer letter. Child, have you thought about yourself while doing this? Mike, you've already changed my life enough. You've done plenty for me. I can't take anything more from you. Yeah, I gave up on Mike's favors. But at the same time, I let go of past humiliations, a failed partner, and a rotten marriage. Calvin can take all the perks Susan brings, from being the Green's son-in-law to the privileged lifestyle. But I remain myself. I have a brand new life ahead. I haven't forgotten those past days, each moment a nightmare. I don't want to live in those nightmares anymore. If I keep tangled up with them, I'll fall into the same old traps. Maria suddenly said, Jack, let us help you again. Consider it our way of helping ourselves. Afraid I'd refuse, she added. Besides, how would the old man face your father in the future? I still refused. I thank you both for your kindness. My father's duty was to serve the country. As his descendant, my mission shouldn't stop at marriage and family life. Life is short. I want to live it as Jack, true to myself. Maria looked at me in shock. In the past, she didn't actually like me. In fact, many of Susan's views of me were Maria's reflections. But now, compared to the infamous Calvin, I, an unsatisfactory single man, became her best option. Yet I refused. Mike calmly said, I see your aspirations. Susan isn't good enough for you. As I left, closing the door, I clearly heard. Maria, usually composed, anxiously said, How could you let him go? What about Susan? Would you really have her marry a scoundrel? Didn't you say Jack doesn't take things because he's afraid? Now see, your daughter found someone greedy and bold. Satisfied yet? If you had understood my efforts, the Greens wouldn't be a joke. I truly felt Mike's intentions. The Greens, after failing for over 20 years to nurture a daughter, found a well-behaved son-in-law to ground her. Whether we loved each other or were happy did not matter. What mattered was I could keep Susan steady, ensure she stayed on the right path, and avoid making the Greens a laughingstock. I really don't owe them anymore. Calvin sat dumbfounded in the front row of the chapel. The guests had already left. Today, neither of the Greens' parents showed up, and even he, the groom, couldn't take the stage. The imagined moment of a defeated Jack watching enviously from below never came true. His own moment of triumph and glory was gone, because now he's not even a temp anymore. Susan smoked several cigarettes beside him, watching the sky darken. Calvin, you should go back. Calvin screamed desperately. Go back? Where can I go back to? Wasn't it you who said we were getting married? Now the new house is gone. I have to go back to my stepfather's home. Why does Jack get everything while I remain invisible, like before, following you in the shadows? Susan irritably stubbed out her cigarette. You're blaming me? Didn't you know you framed Jack? My dad saw it all from the factory manager's office window. Once married, my dad would have made me take responsibility, but you just had to go after Jack. Susan's thoughts stopped there. She really wondered if Calvin liked her for who she was, or because he envied Jack and wanted everything Jack had. Calvin looked at Susan with hatred. I gave you everything and you still doubt me? Susan saw Calvin's vanity and jealousy, feeling deeply hurt inside. Thank you for giving me everything. Now neither you nor me can go back. Why should I give up for you? Give up on Jack? The thought seemed unbelievable to Susan. Maria said if they had a love worth risking all, they could handle anything. Susan's position at her original unit in City Y was completely transferred to City A. Her rank and pay had to start from the bottom again. Considering her plans to settle down, the factory assigned her a basement room as her dorm. Compared to the bright new apartment she once had, the living conditions were much lower. The Greens elders left City A without even meeting Calvin, as if they didn't acknowledge this son-in-law. Many were surprised the Greens could be so harsh with Susan. In truth, Mike had 7 children. Susan was the youngest and got the most attention. But Susan's work abilities and social skills were limited. Mike wanted to toughen her up in City A. Yet, once out of her parents' control, Susan's impulsivity and susceptibility to influence became clear. Everyone at the factory knew what Susan was like, damaging even Mike's reputation. I knew Mike valued family honor above all. So, I had to stir things up to a point of no return from the get-go. But Mike's decision to give up on Susan stemmed from her choice to switch Calvin for a groom. What I didn't expect was that Calvin had also been reborn. In my opinion, Calvin is a smooth talker and knows exactly how to manipulate people. He's also a bit too full of himself. I'm not sure when he died, but in a previous life, he was genuinely kept by Susan with money and love for decades. I've been with the Greens for years. Even with all their family ties and social network, I sometimes feel out of touch with the world outside. Let alone Calvin, who spent his whole life only caring about Susan's moods. When his world revolves around just one person, his actions become ridiculous and foolish. Anyway, this time, I respected their fate and their affair turning into true love. As autumn turned to winter, I quickly found my groove at work again. In the annual evaluation, Jason and I tied for first place. But when it came to picking someone from the plant to go to Y City, I beat Jason by a narrow margin. I knew my win wasn't entirely fair. After all, I had lived a whole life before, and a quick brush-up was enough to ace it. Jason awkwardly shook my hand. Go to Y City. Just get out of here and spare me the headache of seeing you. The day before I left, my department buddies threw me a farewell party. Eric choked up at times, saying, "Jack, eat well, sleep well, take care of yourself out there." But it was Jason, drunk and crying the most, saying, "Jack, with you gone, what motivation do I have to be number one now?" That night, fueled by booze, we shared a lot of honest feelings. Between men, it shouldn't always be about competition. There can be mutual admiration and encouragement too. The next day, I grabbed my luggage and opened the door. All the guys from the department stood at the gate like sunflowers, grinning, seeing me off to my bright future. We walked a bit, took reassuring steps, and said our goodbyes. Just then, Susan and Calvin returned. Today was their difficult but successful day to complete their marriage application and officially get their license. Susan stopped her bike, glaring at me through the crowd. "Jack, with so many people, are you trying to crash the wedding?" Everyone burst out laughing. Susan blushed. "Then what do you want?" Calvin, holding Susan's shoulder, boasted happily, "Today is our day, Susan and I. Let me treat you to wedding candy." But no one wanted it. Eric dismissed them. "You should leave, we don't welcome you." Jason chimed in with disdain. "It's a happy day. Don't bring bad vibes. Go back to the basement." Calvin was about to argue, but Susan stopped him. She played with Calvin's hair while glancing meaningfully at me, as if to say I should still be hung up on her and continue opposing Calvin like a petty, shallow fool, revolving around her. She never really saw me for who I am. Just then, the bus arrived. The guys handed my luggage from behind. Susan's face changed instantly. "Jack, where are you going?" I didn't answer, but turned with my luggage to board the bus. Susan dropped her bike and strode towards me. "Jack, tell me where you're going." Calvin shot me a glare and hurried over to pull Susan away. "We're married now, Jack doesn't have a place here anymore. Why stop him?" Susan pushed Calvin aside with all her might, grabbing my wrist tightly. "Jack, you're an orphan. Where can you go without the Greens? I got married, but I didn't force you out." Her shamelessness disgusted me. "Susan, don't see me as someone as shameless as you. When I was engaged to you, you messed with Calvin. Now you're married. Why do you care if I stay or go?" Susan refused to let go, staring intently at me, hoping to find some lingering affection. But all I had was contempt and disdain. As my anger built, I kicked her in the stomach. As she yelped in pain, I boarded the bus without hesitation. Behind me, I heard Susan desperately shouting, "Jack, Explain to me, wasn't all the acting and reporting because you liked me? Before she could finish, Calvin slapped her hard. Susan, wake up. It's me who got the license with you today. Didn't you say Jack was just your mom's arrangement? Didn't he disgust you? Now, are you slapping me in the face with your behavior? Everyone from the department watched, astounded by what just happened. Truly, their worldview refreshed once more. As the bus moved, I could faintly hear Susan crying. I'm sorry. Sorry for what? She's apologizing to past Jack, not the Jack I am now. I couldn't accept her apology for my past self. After today, whether she continues regretting or not, given her outrageous act on their wedding day, Calvin surely won't let it slide. Without the protection of her family, how long can Susan and Calvin's love withstand gossip and daily trivialities in this life? Watching the scenery pass by the window, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. There are so many unknown surprises and challenges waiting for me in this life. Epilogue. In the 3 years in Y City, Susan sent me countless letters, but I returned them all, marked with no such person by the postman. I wasn't curious about what Susan might say. Eventually, her letters stopped, but she sent a friend from Y City to find me. Each time he came, I was busy, either writing reports or learning new skills. On the third time, during an award ceremony, I came off stage. He finally said, I've realized Susan doesn't deserve you, and then told me why Susan stopped writing. Calvin was seriously ill with a complex condition hard to cure. Susan, facing Calvin's illness, felt a deep fear. Even before Calvin was discharged, she wanted a divorce. Calvin, in despair, tried to hurt himself, accidentally injuring Susan's hand. Susan felt hopeless and sent her friend to plead with me, asking if I could come back and rescue her from this pit, because I was one of her father's most valued people. He's sick too. The friend agreed, certainly. In the last life, Calvin was lonely. Susan even introduced our child to him, making them call him Dad, just to fulfill Calvin's dreams of a family. But this time, Susan couldn't wait to flee back to Y City. All I want is to shake off Calvin. Calvin wasn't willing to give up the chase and headed north, barging into the greens. Susan hid herself. Mike and Maria couldn't care less about acknowledging this future son-in-law. Calvin threw down his medical reports in front of Mike. Mike was so shocked he nearly fainted. Maria was too stunned to move. Why do you look down on me? Jack could help the greens shine. Why can't I? I've waited years for support, and what did I get? Betrayed. So what if I'm sick? I'm here to make the greens accept me. Calvin got sent to a mental hospital. He alone turned the greens upside down. The stress put Mike in bad health. After being bedridden for months, he passed away. When I got the news, I just received an overseas spot. I went to the cemetery to pay my respects. In a past life, I used to call him father. Susan, looking disheveled, saw me. Her eyes lit up with surprise. Jack, I know I wronged. I cut in, you wronged a lot of people like this father who's laid to rest here. Susan stopped in her tracks, as if nailed down by accusations of being unfilial. In a past life, I thought I was the most wronged. But the sight of Mike's grave hit me hard. Mike's early death completely changed the Greens' trajectory from our past. The leading L group in Y City was never established. The Greens' kids scattered after their patriarch died. The Greens couldn't create the wealth it once did. The prominent name turned to decline. The past is the past. I have nothing left to dwell on. I'm Susan, Calvin's love. I went to the mental hospital to see Calvin. The orderly opened layers of iron bars. The whole hospital felt like a prison. With my father's passing and my mother's blame, the home no longer felt like mine. I had so much to say, but all I could talk to was a deranged Calvin. Jack went to America, the very person my dad valued. He got that overseas opportunity, went to college. What went wrong for us? Calvin faced away in his room, sorting his things. He suddenly froze. Susan, maybe you're the sick one. Why are you here talking to me? You think it makes you great? Susan was speechless. Didn't expect the meds to work that well. Then Calvin started ranting again. Of course your dad didn't value you. His will said if you dare marry me, you'd get nothing. They were so ruthless, tricking us into a small town to marry. Halfway through the ceremony, they got word that Jack died, and you felt remorse, said you wanted to go back. Why did they all change? Bury me in a coffin thinking I'm dead. They're ruthless. I dragged you down. There'll be no more. Susan broke into a cold sweat at his bizarre words. Calvin's world didn't seem real. Calvin suddenly rushed towards Susan. The cell bars stopped him. I lost. I lost in both lives. Given a do-over, why didn't I stay away from you? Yet why am I still so unwilling? Susan was drenched in cold sweat. She barely remembered how she managed to leave the mental hospital. In the gentle sunshine, Susan wandered dazedly on the street. Was Calvin truly insane? Who was he ever talking about? Her foot slipped, and she fell into an open manhole.